Welcome to the MTC Report, the news behind the news with journalist Mark Taylor-Canfield. We offer you independent voices and underreported stories about topics you won't hear anywhere else. Join us as we delve into the deeper issues behind the news stories of the day on the MTC Report.
This is Mark Taylor-Canfield for the MTC Report. I want to welcome you to another MTC Report on YouTube. I'm a writer. I've written at the Huffington Post. I've had articles published at the Seattle Times, and I write at Daily Kos, Truth Out. Had a column for a couple years at the Capitol Hill Times, and I'm here today to talk about some amazing things that have been going on, both in politics in the United States and in local Seattle culture. Seattle, where I live, is of course known for its music industry, its music scene, and this last month has been the most incredible historic month of music in Seattle I've ever seen. It's been amazing. It started with two major concerts at Safeco filled by hometown heroes, the Pearl Jam, Eddie Vedder and the guys, and they raised a whole lot of money. With the help of local co-sponsorship with businesses, they raised a whole lot of money for programs to end homelessness in Seattle, where it's been an epidemic in Seattle and Martin Luther King Jr. County. There's over 10,000 people homeless in King County right now. About 3,500 people in Seattle, around 4,000 actually probably, who don't actually have a place to sleep every night, except on the streets. So Pearl Jam did their part to try to raise awareness and raise money for that cause, and so there were two shows at Safeco Field. There was also a major festival down at Alki Beach in Seattle from the Sub Pop folks, that famous iconic label that started all the grunge music scene, working with people like Nirvana. Well, we went down to Alki Beach and I filmed a little bit there with Tommy DeSoto, a world famous photographer, and it was Fastbacks and Mudhoney and Loma, the lead singer for Loma. She jumped off the stage, ran down into the water, took her clothes off and had a bikini underneath her, a swimming suit, and jumped in the water and then ran back up on stage and finished her set. It was amazing. So a lot of fun at that festival, which was free. Also the KEXP shows, a very famous radio station in Seattle, started by Paul Allen, but now a public station, has done some off-the-hook shows at the Mural Amphitheater, tonight being no exception, where my friend Eva Walker, who's such a rock star, headlined the show, or started the show actually, was the opening band with the Black Tones, right, and she totally rocked the house, invited me and some other folks up on stage, and I did some vocals at the Mural Amphitheater right underneath the Space Needle, the most iconic historic spot in Seattle. I think you could actually perform, and incredible visuals there. So we had a great time with Eva. She's such a rock star and such a sweetheart, and we wish her and the Black Tones the best. They deserve all the attention they're getting lately with the airplay on KEXP and these big main stage shows. So kudos to Eva Walker and the Black Tones. There have also been some other shows. The Afghan Wigs, who was also an original kind of sub-pop kind of band, original grunge kind of band from Portland, I believe. Afghan Wigs played KEXP Mural Amphitheater stage a couple weeks ago. After a big showdown at the Seattle City Council meeting, where I played some music for the Seattle City Council as part of the Save the Showbox campaign, where activists and musicians and music fans in Seattle got together and convinced the Seattle City Council to vote unanimously to provide historic preservation status to the Showbox Theater, at least for the next 10 months. So it was a major victory in Seattle for the music scene and music fans and the history of Seattle music. It was great to see the family of musicians and fans coming together in such a sense of community to save the Showbox. We're all happy about that. The Showbox, by the way, is an historic club in downtown Seattle, right across the street from the Pike Place Market. Some of the most famous names in music history have played there, including Prince and David Bowie and all the great Seattle bands. It's just, I saw the legendary Pink Dots there, and it was legendary. So a crazy place to see music, a wonderful, beautiful place to see music. And the Showbox Theater folks opened up their Theater that day during the city council meeting for an open house, and gave away and sold a lot of t-shirts and posters about trying to save the theater. KEXP also jumped on that campaign and did a portraits project at the radio station, which I participated in, where they took people's portraits holding signs with messages to the city council and the mayor's office about why the Showbox is such an historic place and why it should be preserved. So great success for the Seattle music industry at this point. And with the help of Shama Sawant, our Democratic Socialist city council member who spearheaded this campaign, she's usually, spearheading some kind of, campaign for the people in Seattle, and this is definitely one that she took a lead in. So I want to thank the Seattle City Council for voting, by the way, and for listening to my song, both at the committee meeting and at the full council vote at City Hall. Apparently that got covered by a lot of the media, so I was on a lot of TV stations that day. Didn't really have time to pay much attention to it, but we were too busy celebrating at the Showbox and some other places, and the Jack White show that night, which was also off the hook. And that was at the WAMU Center, and he definitely gave a great big shout out to Seattle and the music scene here, and seemed to really enjoy himself. That was a really hard rockin' performance, actually, by Jack White, by the way. He did a few more slower ballady songs, but mostly it was kick-ass hard rock and roll, him and his electric guitar. So it was a great show, a lot of energy there. A lot of great shows. The Hemp Fest Festival just happened, which is the largest cannabis festival. I think it was huge. God knows how many, people, over 100,000 probably showed up at that. I got VIP'd by Vivian McPeak, the guy who had organized that festival, and ended up at the VIP party the day of the opening, and it was great. There was a lot of fun stuff going on there. I hung out with the Dab Girls, and they were beautiful girls dressed as marijuana leaves, and they were having a great time. And I was doing some journalism that day, trying to cover the bands and the people that were performing on the stages and the speakers. And lo and behold, at the last minute, a surprise special guest showed up at the main stage on the last day, and that was Aaron.
Don't go anywhere. The MTC Report with Mark Taylor-Canfield continues next.
So the Aaron Jones show at the Hempfest main stage was off the hook. It was phenomenal and historic. One of the greatest performances I've seen. He did Star Spangled Banner on electric guitar, and it was like channeling the spirit of Jimi Hendrix, who's somebody that means a lot to people who live in Seattle, especially the musicians here like myself, who've been so influenced by his music. So meeting Aaron and hanging out there backstage at the main stage was great. Met a lot of really great people at all of these events, just amazing people in the music industry and music fans of all kinds. So it's been a great month in Seattle for the history of the Seattle music scene, and I just wanted to give a shout out to all the people that participated and all the people that support the music scene in Seattle. We really appreciate that. It's part of what makes the city such a great place to live. And hopefully it will continue forever, right? Because we really love the underground music scene here, especially. It is a city where you can go see great shows at the Crocodile or Numos or the Showbox and other clubs in town, El Corazon, Shorty's, just really great places. The Tractor Tavern, there's all sorts of very famous venues that are sort of underground but amazing, and big bands play there, so it's always a lot of fun. You can get right up front on the stage and maybe possibly meet some of your idols as far as the music industry. I know when Deerhoof, one of my favorite bands from San Francisco, was up here at Numos and also at the Crocodile, we got a chance to hang out with them and do some interviews and film them, and that was great. I had so much fun with that band. They're so much fun. They're wacky and fun. So that's what's been going on sort of, in the cultural arts scene in Seattle. But there have been some other things, of course, going on around the country that people are very concerned about, and that has to do with the verdicts in the Manafort trial and also the Cohen trial. Donald Trump's former attorney. And so, people are asking the question, things like, can a standing president be prosecuted for crimes and crimes that were committed before his tenure as president? And, there is a legal precedent for that. And I would recommend that people I would refer people to the Georgetown University Law School paper on this subject. Can a standing president be prosecuted? And the answer is yes, they can. I mean, just because you're president of the United States, there is nothing, and this is, one legal interpretation. It's my interpretation as a journalist. I'm not an attorney. But there is nothing in the United States Constitution that provides universal immunity for a standing president. It's just not there, okay? So it's up to the courts to decide. And it's also up to special prosecutors, right? Like Mr. Mueller and, Ken Starr and the special prosecutors Jaworski in the Watergate case against Richard Nixon. By the way, I feel the ghost of Richard Nixon everywhere these days, and Watergate is like coming back. So I'm sorry for the folks who support Trump, but there's a lot of corruption going on in his administration, the people that surround him, and a lot of it is coming to light. So there's really no way you can deny that. I mean, you can claim that there's some kind of persecution going on in the judiciary, in the Justice Department of the Trump folks and supporters. But, do you believe in the rule of law or not? I mean, that's a question that most of the time you would hear that from, ultra-right people or conservatives. But, sometimes now you hear that actually from people on the more liberal side. Is like, do you believe in rule of law? If you do, then that means that a president should be prosecuted for crimes, whether he's a standing president or not. And even Mike Pence, the vice president, has said that in the past, that if a president has committed crimes, he must be prosecuted. And there are already many charges, out there. A lot of the people around Trump have already been tried and convicted. There have been numerous felonies at this point. The question is how culpable is the president for some of these crimes, including obstruction of justice, the idea of collusion. There are many questions that journalists and other folks have about what is possible legally under the current circumstances. And, there's this whole power struggle, too, between the president and his appointees in the Justice Department. When Richard Nixon tried to fire everybody, they called it the Saturday Night Massacre, and it totally blew up in his face. It was a very bad thing for his presidency and was kind of the final straw leading to his downfall. So, and if you listen to what people like John Dean are saying, who was one of the people who helped bring Nixon down, his house of cards, John Dean would say that, the current occupant of the White House is unfit to be the president of the United States. So there are many charges of corruption. There's obstruction of justice. The firing of Comey is one example. James Comey, the former head of the FBI. I mean, if it can be proven that he was fired because he was investigating, Donald Trump and his minions and, folks in his campaign staff or in his cabinet, or his supporters, then okay, it could be considered obstruction of justice, conflict of interest at the very least. And there's all sorts of other issues now about the possible co-conspiracy. Some people, including a senator from Hawaii, refused, I think it was Mazi Hirono, she refused to meet with Donald Trump's new Supreme Court nominee, Kavanaugh, because she said that, Trump is a co-conspirator. He's a quote, unindicted co-conspirator in crimes having to do with these payoffs that were happening through his former attorney Cohen. Payoffs of, a woman who claimed that they had an affair. And Trump himself in the past has defended himself by saying that there was no affair and that the payoffs had nothing to do with the campaign and that it was a private matter, and basically says that there was no affair and that the woman was, he didn't use this word, but he kind of implies that she was blackmailing him, and that it happens to a lot of wealthy people and famous people or whatever, that people blackmail them with slander, and that they basically paid this woman off in order to keep her quiet, not because he had done anything wrong, but because she was lying to everyone. So that has yet to be proven one way or the other. It's a he said, she said kind of thing. And in a lot of these cases, people have made, contradictory statements at different times, including Cohen. So it remains to be seen how the courts are going to deal with all this. But in the case of Cohen, he did make a plea deal. And so then you had Lenny Davis on Rachel Maddow's show on MSNBC saying that Cohen has information potentially giving evidence of Trump's collusion with the Russians and possibly the interfering in the U.S. elections in 2016. So if that's true, that could be a total game stopper right there. That could be like huge. I mean, unprecedentedly historic in terms of what it could mean for the presidency and potential constitutional crisis if Trump refuses to adhere to, the rule of law. So there you go. He seems to be very authoritarian in his approach to governing, and so anybody that disagrees with him is suddenly a traitor. He reminds a lot of people of Benito Mussolini and his kind of tough guy bullying kind of stance all the time.
Very peaceful protest. I have not called for the harm of anybody. This president has lied again when he's saying that I called for harm to anyone. I am having sleepless nights about the children, and really, I don't want to engage constantly with this lying president. This Don the Con man will say anything. He is the one that's responsible for promoting violence. This is the President of the United States who promotes violence, who supports those who are practicing violence, and when he talks about any comment that I have made relative to these children, he's lying once again.
So I would say at least 400 different news agencies, news organizations around the country did publish editorials that day. We at Democracy Watch News did a podcast on that, and I wrote at Daily Kos about press freedom that day. So we did participate, and I did participate in that nationwide act of solidarity, which was good to see. Once again, it was good to see journalists in this case and news organizations finally coming together and working together cooperatively to talk about this issue of press freedom, which is so important and which nobody up until that time seems to want to talk about. In fact, I reported on this before, how I had submitted some articles to some major newspapers and news outlets like the New York Times, the Seattle Times, the LA Times, asking them to publish my editorial on press freedom, and they refused to do it. So there you go. This time 400 different newspapers and news organizations did it. So it was a great success and a great sense of solidarity amongst the journalists, editors, publishers, netizens and bloggers across the country, citizen journalists too. So thank you for everybody who participated in that. And it was highlighted on Twitter, at least under the hashtag press freedom, or free press especially. But that's been a great sign. And there is a recent study by the Poynter Institute, which is actually showing that people are now starting to actually have a little bit more respect for journalism, because I think they're beginning to figure out how to weed out the fake news from the real news. And yes, there is fake news out there, Mr. President, but it's not just people who disagree with you, okay? There's a lot of fake news on Fox, so I'm sorry, but that's the truth. And I'm speaking as a journalist who tries to adhere to journalistic ethics about telling the truth and being honest. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to agree with the president, and it doesn't mean that you have to agree with anybody else to tell the truth. You just present the facts as they are and let people make up their own mind. Personally, politically, I have no party affiliation. I am independent, so these thoughts are my own. I'm not speaking for anyone else. I am executive director of Democracy Watch News, which is an international news agency that follows pro-democracy movements around the world. And I also write at Daily Kos and Truth Out, and have the MTC Report, of course, here on YouTube. And I also am a journalist working with the Jeff Santa Show, broadcasting nationally from Boston a couple times a month. So that's where you can find my stuff. I'm also a musician, so you can find my music on YouTube and SoundCloud. And, you know, I'm just up here in Seattle, which is a very progressive part of the country, documenting a kind of new style of politics and art and music and culture, which is a little bit farther to the leftist center maybe than the rest of the country, but a very interesting place nonetheless, and very, very creative. So I swear there are more geniuses per capita in the city of Seattle than any other place I've lived, and I've spent time in Los Angeles, New York City, Paris, and London, so I should tell you something. But here's the thing. Yes, a president can be prosecuted while in office, okay? There is no direct immunity from that, and it's up to the special prosecutor and Mueller whether to bring charges and indict the president. Now, if he has committed crimes, even during the court process, there can also be an impeachment where the Congress basically has a vote of no confidence, right? And can try the president for high crimes and misdemeanors. And other charges that may, you know, get him removed from office or cause a resignation. And so the question is, you know, what would Trump do if he were impeached? Would he fight it, or would he resign like Nixon? There are many people that I've talked to recently who say, oh, he'll just resign and say screw it to the whole system, saying that it's rigged from the beginning. Other folks say no, he'll stick in there and fight the Congress and fight his own Justice Department. Which is starting to sound a little bit like a dictator who refuses to step down, kind of like what happened in the Gambia in Africa just over the last couple of years, where the president refused to step down and refused to, you know, have elections. And that's what happens sometimes. Now, Trump can't really refuse to have elections, okay, but he can definitely try to obstruct the process to remove him from office. And if his past behavior and statements are any indication, he will continue to do that. So stay tuned to the MTC report, and I'll continue to report on these breaking developments in the case. So this is Mark Taylor-Canfield for the MTC report. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
Well, you sold me down the river. I passed to the shore. I said you sold me down the river. You don't want me no more. I said you sold me down the river. I passed to the shore. I said you sold me down the river, 'cause you don't want me no more. I said you sold me down the river. You don't want me no more. You said you don't like my music, says it scraps and rip. Well, I said my song's a baby, then maybe you're the boo. Well, I tried to make you happy, but you just let me down. I tried to do my best for you, but you just slept around. I gave you all my money, but you just wanted some more. I said I love you, honey. You just wanted to the door. Sold me down the river. Sold me down the river. You sold me down the river. Baby said you sold me down the river, 'cause you don't want my love anymore. You said you want me to stay home and help with the chores. I said, well, baby, I'm starting to get bored.
What's up?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to give you and your listeners some background on a story that I've been covering up here between the David and Goliath battle in Seattle between City Council member Shama Sawant and the $700 billion behemoth Amazon and Jeff Bezos. And it's over affordable housing. I'm writing about this over at BuzzFlash, and I'm doing some reports at the MTC Report on YouTube. But the council just barely avoided a veto by Mayor Jenny Durkin. The original proposal was for $75 million tax on employees' hours at corporations that make more than $20 million in revenue a year. Mm-hmm. But last-minute pressure from Jeff Bezos and Amazon was able to ratchet that down to a proposal for $48 million, which the council actually voted on unanimously. But that was because of a threat by a veto from our supposedly progressive mayor, Jenny Durkin, former,
Isn't Jeff Bezos the richest man in the world?
He is.
Why does he care about something that's going to generate something equal to, the amount of money he makes in probably less than 3 seconds?
Exactly, and that was Shama Sawant's original statement on that. Actually, the Seattle Chamber of Commerce did their own commissioned report and found that we need at least $400 million to house the homeless in this area. And just so people know what's going on here, during the last homeless count in Martin Luther King Jr. County, where Seattle's located, 11,600 people are without permanent residence, and 4,000 people are sleeping outdoors every night in the city of Seattle, which my statement on this is, Tom, if these these economic refugee camps were located on an international border, they would qualify for assistance from the United Nations and the Red Cross. But because they're in the middle of our city, and by the way, we have the third largest homeless population in the country, only behind New York and Los Angeles, our state legislature has prohibited any kind of rent control in the state, and that was due to some zealous Republicans. And, my question is, of course, where's the rest of this money going to come from if Amazon's able to come in at the last minute over just, the last week or the last weekend and change the vote? And is it, how can you really say if you're not willing to pay your fair share, if you've dislocated an entire population of people and the rent has tripled and the real estate prices have gone through the roof and people are leaving the city who have lived here for 35 years, how can you say that you're a good community partner if you're one of those major corporations? And it wasn't just Amazon who was opposed to this tax, but if you're one of those large corporations making billions of dollars in Seattle and you're not willing to pay your fair share, can we really then consider you a good community partner?
Well, and it also...
And where is corporate social responsibility, Tom?
Yeah, and well, beyond that, I'm not sure that corporate social responsibility, let me rephrase that. I'm not sure that corporations should be involved in governance. I mean, it's certainly, the First Amendment gives them the right to petition the government for redress of grievances, in other words, to lobby. But because of the Buckley decision in '76, all the way, and a whole series of other Supreme Court decisions all the way up to McCutcheon in 2013, we now have corporations calling the tunes. We've got corporations deciding what's happening in cities and state governments, and federal governments too, for that matter. We got corporations having the entire Republican Party denying climate change, for example. Mark, it's obscene. It's absolutely obscene. Thanks for the call and thanks for the update. I appreciate it. It's always nice to hear from you. We'll be back. It's 21 minutes past the hour.